screwed up. I'm trying to think of somebody to blame. I guess I could blame Francis.
Nice in your back.
Oh,
What
Edison's in
did you do
back.
the other day,
Yeah, Edison's in back. Okay, it must be his fault.
You-
Obviously.
Blame Francis.
Francis did it. Okay. But Francis is such a nice guy. How can I possibly blame him? Okay. We were talking about schemas. Okay. That's crooked. Oh, I guess that's better. Okay. Yeah, we're talking about schemas last time. So we have these ideas in our head. We have this organizational structure in our head, and we refer to those as schemas. And we have schemas for just about everything. And we create scripts as to what's going to happen next or what should be happening next. And all of these are known as schemas. We have a gender schema. Males do this, females do that, women look like this, males look like that. And the gender schemas, of course, can be considered social stereotypes. And of course, you know, so what are our politicians supposed to be? If we have a gender schema that all politicians are supposed to be male, of course that's stereotyping and incorrect. So we do have gender schemas that we maintain. Nurses are supposed to be female, doctors are supposed to be male, of course. But that's not true at all. I've run into some really good female nurses. My mother was a nurse. I've run into some really good female doctors and some really bad male doctors, and some really good male nurses and some really bad female nurses. So the schemas don't always, it doesn't always play out the way you think it's supposed to. Schemas can be applied rapidly and automatically when we encounter other people. And of course this can lead to stereotypes, but it helps us organize our thoughts. It helps us look at things rapidly. We can, if we have a schema for the enemy, we know what they're supposed to do. We know what they're supposed to look like. We know how they're supposed to act. So if we see somebody acting in that way, our brains can say, well, that's the enemy. We need to be careful. Schemas can help us deal with new situations by giving us a basis for interpreting a new situation, and actually that's really the positive things about schemas. What you need to do, of course, is fight the stereotype. You need to make sure that the stereotype doesn't take precedent over what's actually happening. Did I go backwards? Schemas are a good way to organize our thoughts and give structure to our memories by filling in the blanks when trying to remember something, so that everything isn't brand new. If everything's brand new, then we're constantly pondering as to what's going on and who we're supposed to be, who this person is and what they're doing. So schemas are good. I mean, they give us the capability of thinking rapidly. Schemas can aid us in paying attention to by adding organization to our thoughts, and organization is always good. Organization is always good. Now the problem is, of course, if people follow the stereotypes, they have a schema, they follow the stereotypes, and they assume that their stereotypes are always correct. Now that can be potentially a problem. Racial stereotypes, racial schemas. Natives act like this, African Americans act like this, Hispanics look like that. If we maintain these stereotypes, now we got a problem. What would be a Native American stereotype?
Teepees.
I'm sorry?
Drunkenness?
Drunk?
Teepees.
Teepees? There's a whole living teepees, everybody knows that. I've watched the movies. I saw it in a movie one time. Actually, there was a movie about this area, and it was John Ford. He did everything over in Monument Valley, and by golly, they had a whole village of teepees, which was kind of odd because there was no grass.
I watched it. It was so funny because he's actually speaking Navajo, and he's just, like trash talking him. He's like, no, you're wrong. And he's like, go, whatever in your own S.
I know you guys understand what he's actually saying, and it's a joke, which means that Navajos who speak Navajo can't really watch that movie without laughing or having a really good time. Once the schema is activated, we see more information consistent with the schema, and this is a problem as well. Open-mindedness. Schemas, in this case, of course, the schemas have become stereotypes, and we're allowing the stereotype to control us rather than the information that we're receiving. We process the information very quickly, and that's okay. We remember it better if we have a schema for this. Schemas can be activated outside of curious awareness. And this is known as accessibility. And accessibility is a good thing, but accessibility, of course, if it leads to closed-mindedness, just trying to maintain your stereotype, then this is a problem. But accessibility, of course, is the way that we learn new things. Recent experiences will increase our accessibility to the schemas that deal with these experiences, and this is known as priming. So if you've had an experience that's similar to this, you get on a train in Japan. The Japanese trains are very crowded. If you get a seat, you better keep it, because you'll pretty soon there's not going to be any seats to be had. If you think that you can, in the United States, of course, a lot of people have this large area, this large personal space that they try to maintain. You go to the airports, people are sitting down in a chair and they put their bags on the seat so that nobody will sit down beside them. Well, if you do the same thing in Japan, well, that's extremely rude. And of course, you would be looked down on by the Japanese for one thing. But as Americans, of course, we kind of ignore these kinds of things. Of course, if you get on a train in the United States, you can probably maintain your personal space. If you try to do the same thing in Japan, it's not going to work, because the conductor will come and he'll move the stuff, and he may even fine you for it.
They can do that?
They can do that. Oh yeah, they can do that. And now the interesting thing in Japan is that the people are tremendously, what's the word I'm looking for? I've just lost my train of thought. Anyway, the Japanese don't steal things. So if you leave something on a train, you can go back the next day and it'll be sitting right where you left it. And then nobody will pick it up. There is no lost and found in Japan. As confusing as that is. So, but it'll be there.
Back.
Well, it's not theirs, so they would never take something that's not theirs, which is really kind of interesting. They're very honest, I guess that was the word I was looking for. Anyway, so if the priming would be, well, this is how I act on a train. In the United States, if I'm Amtrak, I try to find a seat by myself. I don't want to sit beside anybody. It just doesn't happen in Japan. So of course the priming has taken place, but now we need to adjust the information that we have. Something can be primed for 3 reasons. It's chronically accessible due to past experiences. So you've had experiences, you know the Japanese, you've had past experiences on trains, so now we have to put the 2 together. So we have past experience, so now we know how to act on a train in Japan. Accessible because it is related to a current goal, and of course you want to get from one place to another in Japan. The interesting thing about traveling in Japan, the gasoline is extremely expensive, airfare is fairly expensive, and the train fare is fairly expensive. So the thing is that if you travel from, I was up in the northern part of Japan, if you travel from Misawa to Tokyo, if you go by plane, it's going to cost you $400. If you go by car, it's going to cost you $400. And if you go by train, it's going to cost you $400. This is the way it works. You can't get from one place to another without spending a lot of money. It's just how it works. Japanese, of course, don't travel, hardly at all, unless they have to. So it's not like everybody's just moving up and down, and people are going from Kyoto to Tokyo. You know, if they will go on vacation, they'll travel someplace, but the rest of the time they just stay in the same place. It's just the way they do things. They're not like us. They're not like Americans. Geez, I went to Albuquerque last weekend. You know, 200 miles. I just drove to Albuquerque. Well,
Oh yeah, I forgot to ask, how was that?
What?
Your
What, Albuquerque?
drive?
To Albuquerque?
Good burger.
I went as fast as I
Oh
could.
yeah, did you stop at Blake's?
No, I didn't. Where did I eat? Let me think. What did I do? I had breakfast at Carl's Jr. And I don't think I ate on the road after that. So I came back and made food, I guess, at my house. I was trying to get back. My dogs escaped. They escaped this morning. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with them. Somebody's going to pet them. Somebody's going to pick them up. I gotta build a better fence, Francis. That's what I need to do. I gotta keep those damn dogs in the yard. Bastards. Little bastards. Temporarily accessible because of our recent experiences, of course. So all of this stuff has to do with priming, and that's what we do in order to understand what the hell's going on as far as our schema is concerned. This is the question for chapter 3, if I remember, self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a case whereby people have an expectation about what another person is like, which influences how they act toward that person, which causes that person to behave consistently with people's original expectations, making the expectations come true. And of course, we talk about this with African Americans when they take tests. For the longest time, even some African American scholars were saying that African Americans aren't as smart as white people because we'll look at the statistics, that kind of thing. Well, the reality is that they're living down to other people's expectations, which is really unfortunate. For a long time, people were saying the same thing about American Indians and math. American Indians can't do math. I don't know where that came from, I guess because all the math teachers that taught American Indians were crap. But I've known some really, really good mathematicians who are American Indians. It's just a stereotype, and it's one that we need to get rid of. But we live down to the expectations of the people that teach us. Teachers will do this with their students, maintaining the stereotypes that minorities will struggle to the point of failure, and that girls will be good and boys will be bad. And of course, if we go into any classroom, no matter where it is, the boys are in the back of the room, and the girls are in the front of the room. The girls are being paid attention to, and the boys are being ignored. It's just the way teachers do things. It's their expectations, therefore the individuals are living down to their expectations. 1968, Rosenthal and Jacobson assigned spatial status to random students and told their teachers about the spatial status. At the end of the year, the spatial students had excelled because they created a warmer emotional climate for those students, giving them more personal attention, encouragement, and support. The teachers did. They gave them more challenging material. They gave them more and better feedback. They gave them more opportunities to respond in class and gave them longer to respond. So despite the fact that these were all randomly selected, the kids weren't actually special. The teachers treated them differently. Because they treated them differently, they did better. As horrible as that is. Heuristics are rule of thumb strategies that enable us, an individual, to make quick, efficient judgments about a situation. We use heuristics to promote our own survival. Humans as a species have developed heuristics to ensure survival takes place. Being right isn't nearly as important as being alive, and so heuristics are usually the things that keep us alive. Okay. When I was in the military, you always protect your medic, because the medic represents, he may save your life. The other people, they'll save your life, but this guy really knows medicine, so you better take care of your medic. And that was kind of nice. I was always in the middle. I was always being protected. They tried to make sure that that I wasn't in front of anything. You always protect your medic. One of the most common heuristics that we use is detecting typicalness when making a decision. This is known as representativeness heuristics. Representative heuristics are are often applied even against overwhelming odds because we trust our instincts so frequently. So if we saw these are all typical summer activities. Computer programming, this lady's a rollerblading person, she's got the knee pad thing going. Scuba diver, mountain biking, she's wearing biking shorts, so you can see all the water skier, of course, has the whatever that thing is that they put around their chest. Tennis player was wearing a tennis outfit. Okay, anyway, typicalness. So if we saw these people on the beach and we saw their tan lines, we could identify who they are. When I was taught, Tversky and Kahneman are the ones that came up with these questions. These are really kind of fascinating questions. They talked to 70 engineers and 30 lawyers. They interviewed these guys. Using a random sample from the interviews, the individual, they identified this individual. He's a twice divorced man who spends most of his free time at a country club. He regrets following in his father's footsteps. He wishes he hadn't spent so much time in college on academics and instead spent more time socializing so that he wouldn't be so quick to argue with people. Is he a lawyer or an engineer? Looking at this information, is he a lawyer or an engineer?
Lawyer?
Lawyer? What do you think?
With people, engineer.
You think he's an engineer? Okay. Engineer?
Lawyer.
Okay, so we're 50-50. The reality is we should be 70-30. I mean, there's 70 of them are engineers and 30 of them are lawyers. However, when Tversky and Kahneman gave this scenario to thousands of individuals, 80% said it was a lawyer. It sounds like a lawyer, they said. Well, the reality is statistics will show, and we've got the statistics right here, 70 were engineers and only 30 of them were lawyers. So what's the probability that he's a lawyer? Well, 30%. What's the probability he's an engineer? 70%, because it's 70-30, okay. But 80% thought he was a lawyer because he sounded like a lawyer. Representativeness heuristics. Here's another one. Linda is 31 years old. She's single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Is she a bank teller or a college professor? We've got her biography right here. Is she a bank teller or a college professor?
It's a philosophy, majored in philosophy as a college professor. Deals with
That doesn't
social
sound like
issues.
either.
She's neither one.
Yeah.
She's a housewife.
Something.
No, she's one or the other.
Professor?
College professor? College professor? Bank teller? Bank teller?
Professor.
Professor? So we're 3-1. Well, here's so 75% of you think that she's a college professor, and one of you thinks she's a bank teller. What's the answer? She has a 50-50 chance of being either one. Okay. This is Thomasina. She's very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with little interest in people or in the world of reality. She's a meek and tidy soul. She has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Is she a librarian or is she a doctor?
Librarian.
Librarian?
Okay.
Librarian? What do you think?
I think she's a librarian.
A librarian, 3 librarians? 4 librarians? Librarian? Okay. 5 librarians? She's got a 50-50 chance of being either one, right? Doesn't she? Okay. But we said 100% librarian. She sure sounds like a librarian. An example of a representative heuristic is the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect is a phenomenon that when a general nebulous description is given to an individual of themselves, they believe it strongly despite the fact that it could be true of anyone. And of course, if you've ever taken a personality test, all the stuff they tell you about yourself, oh, that's me, all that stuff they tell you is fairly nebulous. I mean, it's just like picked out of the air. You know, you like to go on long walks in the on the beach, you know. Well, everybody likes to go on long walks on the beach. That's no big deal. They do this, well, they used to anyway. They don't they don't have centerfolds in Playboy. I don't think Playboy, they don't even print Playboy anymore. But the ladies always like to take long walks on the beach, as odd as that seems. The way people accepted findings of a personality test is an example of the Barnum effect. And of course, if we talk to somebody and they say, I know you, you're really smart and you're open-minded, well, those are just general terms. They're not talking about you specifically. You can say that about just about anybody, and as long as you compliment people, they will accept what you've said. And that's known as the Barnum effect. So I can sell you a car, by golly, by telling you, well, you're a really smart person, and you're discerning, and I can tell that you know about cars.
That's car salesman.
Well, there you go, there. Barnum effect. Today and today only.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you a good deal. We were selling this car for $1,000, but for you, I'm going to sell it for $1,500. How's that? $1,500. And I can tell that you know about cars. While people tend to be slow to deduce particular instances from a general truth, they're remarkably quick to infer a general truth from a vivid instance. This is known as availability heuristics. In the South, far more rapes are committed by white males than black males. It's statistics. So what's the probability that a black male is more dangerous than a white male? Not very high, right? Okay. But because the rape of white women by black males is so widely publicized, white women are more likely to fear a stranger who is black than one that is white. And this is a point of fact around the United States. And I don't think I can get the Willie Horton thing. But you need to see this advertisement. This advertisement was played in the presidential election in 1988. George H.W. Bush ran this ad about Dukakis. He said that Dukakis released this guy from prison. He was a very large black man. He went and he raped a woman and killed her boyfriend. I think that's the way it worked. He raped and murdered. I guess he raped and murdered the woman as well. But this guy had been released from prison by Dukakis, and of course, you know. And they show this guy, and they show him several times. Really kind of fascinating. He's got lots of hair, he's got a really hairy face. It's fairly he's a fairly stereotypical male, very stereotypical black male. It's really kind of fascinating. And when you see him with the police, he's like head and shoulders above everybody else. I mean, the policemen must be midgets, because this guy is huge. And it's really kind of fascinating. So what in the world was he trying to say? Well, he's trying to say that Dukakis was weak on crime, but actually what he was doing, he was trying to scare people. He was trying to scare people that Dukakis would allow black men to rape white women, or just to rape women, I guess. Anyway, and a lot of people voted for Bush after that. And to this day, Bush he apologizes. Every time the Willie Horton thing comes up, he apologizes. He says, I didn't know it was being run. I didn't approve it before it happened. They just did it. And it's not me, okay? It was them, whoever them is, the other Republicans, I guess. Anyway, it's really kind of fascinating. You need to watch the video to see just how inflammatory the whole process was. Unfortunately, as humans, we tend to base our heuristics on what is in our memory rather than to take time to analyze a situation. We assume that if something comes readily to mind, then it is commonplace, which is not always true. I used to have a friend, he just died last week. I used to have a friend, and we would have these conversations, and he would say, well, everybody knows black people are more likely to be criminals than anybody else. That's one of the reasons why we shoot them in the street. And of course he was a cop. And I say, well, not really. I mean, that's not really true if you look at, you know, and I give him all these statistics. And he said, oh, you know, you don't watch television enough. Or you watch too much television. You're watching the wrong shows on television. You need to watch Cops. If you watch Cops, you really understand what was going on in the United States. Really? Is that representative of what's going on in the United States? But of course, that's, you know, that's what he was focusing on. And when he saw a black man doing something or committing a crime, he said, "Yeah, that fits." And when he saw somebody else committing a crime, it just didn't register with him. That was just the way he worked. That's the way his brain worked. He was not analytical. Because pictures of plane crashes are more likely to make the paper. As a matter of fact, there was a plane crash over the weekend in Russia that killed 71 people, and we got to see all the pictures of all the... We didn't see any bodies. What we saw were chunks of airplane, orange and blue, if I remember correctly. Because we see pictures of plane crashes in the paper, people see airplane travel as more dangerous than automobile travel. However, statistics show you that you're 26 times more likely to die in a car crash than in an airplane crash. Even though, well, they're not newsworthy. Car crashes are not newsworthy. Cultures will often influence the way a person thinks. People in Western cultures tend to have an analytic thinking style, focusing on objects without considering surrounding context. People in Eastern cultures use a holistic thinking style, focusing on the overall context relation between objects. And I keep talking about the shooter in Las Vegas. As Americans, of course, we want to know why he did it. We want to know what the situation was. If we were Chinese or if we were Japanese, for one thing, we wouldn't care about dead Americans. But for another thing, we would be looking at the shooting in Las Vegas from a different perspective. Our perspective would be, well, what type of a town is Las Vegas? It's got all these casinos. Of course, he must have lost his money and then he shot up the place. We would see it from a more holistic point of view. As Americans, of course, we just think of him as this evil person that we need to figure out why he did what he did. Controlled thinking is thinking that is conscious, intentional, voluntary, and effortful. There is a question as to how much of our behavior comes under control or controlled thinking, comes under control of controlled thinking, and how much is dictated by automatic thinking. Controlled thinking gives us the feeling of free will because we have control over this thinking, so it gives us the ability to not think the way everybody else does. That's controlled thinking. The more people believe in free will, the more likely they will help others. The less people believe in free will, the more likely they will participate in moral actions such as cheating. They feel that society controls them and they are only cheating society, not themselves. So they don't mind cheating, they don't mind stealing, they don't mind, it's Walmart, so why can't I shoplift? You know, those people they're the richest people in the world, the Waltons. Everybody knows that. All I'm doing is stealing from the Waltons, I'm not stealing from... So why not? Let's do it. Let's go shoplift at Walmart. Who am I hurting?
Nobody.
There you go. Let's do it. It's free stuff. All you have to do is put it in your pocket. Have I convinced you yet?
Almost. I'll be right now.
I agree.
In Montana, there were, the Hutterites. You know about the Hutterites. They shoplift. They do a lot. They do. They know. But then again, they're different from other people. They don't speak the same language as everybody else does. They speak German.
I see them in the casinos when I go back home. You know, like the young guys, they'll be sitting there and they'll like, I'll pull up to a gas station and they'll be gambling.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, aren't you guys not allowed to gamble? You know? And then they, for some reason, 1 year, 2 years ago, we couldn't pick any Sabbath berries. All the Sabbath berries were being picked we're like, where's our Salisbury's going? And we use it for our ceremonies.
Sure.
Well, the Hutterites were driving around town selling ice cream gallons of Salisbury's. They were out there picking them all. And I was thinking, well, at least they're selling them back to us.
They did the same thing at Belknap. At Belknap they have, what do they call those things? There's another type of berry, and they grow all over the place. And they'll come right on campus.
And then they take their dead and they what do you call it, cremate them? Then they sprinkle all the ashes all over their crops, so like their flour, their potatoes and everything.
Yeah.
And then they'll come and they'll sell all their stuff, and my mom's like, don't be buying their stuff. They sprinkle their dead on it, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Weird people.
It's a religious order, and they feel that God will provide, which is an interesting concept, which means that you can take it, I guess. So they don't see it as stealing; they see it as God providing for them when they're in need. As odd as that may seem. Service berries, is that what you're calling them? Service berries?
Satisberries.
Satisberries. Okay.
And just a FYI, it's 32 below up there right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Butte, it was 80 below. Can you believe that? But I think that's just with the wind chill factor.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Everybody snowed in. It was so cold.
My wife keeps me apprised as to what's going on in Montana. We have a lot of friends up there. They brag about how cold it is all the time. They complain about how cold it is all the time.
Yeah, I don't think they're bragging. I think they're complaining.
They can handle it. Well, their car won't start. Your car won't start at 80 below. The oil has just turned into syrup. I mean, it's that thick. It's frozen. It's like ice cream. You have to keep your car plugged in. Anyway. So some people think that it's okay to cheat. And who are they hurting? Who are the Hutterites hurting if they go to Walmart or Kmart and just fill their pockets with stuff? Who are they hurting? Well, they're not hurting themselves because that's not their mindset. So it's really kind of fascinating. So if you have this concept of free will, you're more likely to try to help somebody. If you have this concept of free will, you're not going to cheat because you feel like, well, there's a reason why this is here. There's a reason why Bradway's giving me this test, and it's to find out how much I know. I'm trying to tell myself how much I know, and if I cheat, of course there is no cheating in my class because everything's online. You can do anything you want. I just want you to know the material. Anyway, so there's no cheating, I guess. There's no cheating. Anyway.
So like starfish throwers have free will? Like they have that concept of free will?
Who does?
Starfish throwers? Starfish throwers?
Starfish throwers.
There are people in India who feed the poor.
Oh, okay.
It's just like a way to describe what they do because they said there are people that go on the beach all the time and there's these starfishes all over the beach and sometimes they dry up. But there are some people who go on the beach and they throw the starfishes back in so they live.
Okay.
Other people just walk by and let them dry out.
Okay. So they're starfish throwers. That's an interesting concept. Okay. Huh. Haven't you always wanted a starfish to take home and put in there?
Yeah. Everyone get in trouble.
You want to throw them back in the ocean?
Yeah.
Okay. Starfish throwers. Interesting. Yeah, they would believe in free will. Yeah, they want to help everybody. Interesting. Well, let's not talk about politics. Trump has decided he's going to cut welfare, but he's going to feed the poor. He's going to send them boxes of food.
Is that what he's saying?
That's what he's saying now.
Oh my God.
But he's going to cut welfare. I won't talk about what his ideas are. He thinks people cheat. See, he thinks everybody else cheats. He's kind of interesting that way. He thinks everybody else cheats. Counterfactual thinking refers to mentally simulating events to imagine alternative scenarios. The closer an outcome, the more likely an individual will participate in counterfactual thinking. Research shows that the closer an individual comes to winning, the more regret that they feel. So if you just barely get beaten out, he's a tenth of a second in front of you, you think, oh, if I was only a tenth of a second faster, I could have tied him or maybe beaten him. And of course, that's counterfactual thinking. I ran against the world record holder in the 100-yard dash one time. He was a world record holder in the 100-yard dash. We're running the 220. That's twice as long. The race is twice as long. Anyway, so it's this little bitty guy. He's about this tall, but he weighs like 220 pounds. He's just solid. He's got legs the size, if I put both of mine together, that's the size of one of his legs. So he's huge. He's got shoulders like this, but he's only this tall. His name was Ivory Crockett. He went to Southern Illinois University, and we ran against those guys. And I was running the 220. And we started out, and I'll tell you what, I was right there with Ivory. I was. Of course, he was. It's on a curve. You run it on a curve, so it's a staggered start. And he was actually inside of me, and he got to my shoulder in about 3 steps. He had made up the stagger in about 3 steps. And then he just kept pulling away. I stayed with him for, I don't know, maybe 5 steps, and with him on my shoulder. And then we came off the curve, and the guy's like 10 yards ahead of me. I know. Could I have beaten Ivory Crockett? Not in my dreams could I have beaten Ivory Crockett, because he was a world record holder for one thing. He broke the record, not the world record, but he broke the meet record in that race. And of course the rest of us were 10 yards behind him. And we were all fighting for second place. We all came across at the same time. I came in 4th.
Did you ever have like wanted to go to the Olympics?
Yeah, but it's not going to happen. I'm not that fast.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit short for that. My legs aren't long enough. The more significant the event, the more likely the individual will participate in counterfactual thinking. Playing over and over again in our minds the accidental death of someone close to us is very common. If only this had happened, if only I'd started 3 seconds later, I wouldn't have been in the accident, and this person would have died. All of these things happen all the time, or we have these ideas all the time. However, we tend to live with less regret over an incident that we did not have anything we did than things that we didn't do. We have less regret over things that we did rather than things that we didn't do. Trying and failing seems less regrettable than never trying at all. And of course, Alfred Lloyd Tennyson wrote a poem about that very thing. This is in Memoriam 27 that he wrote in 1850. I hold it true whate'er befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. It's a famous quote.
Everybody says that.
Yeah. And it's true, but it hurts. I mean, it hurts to lose somebody. I've been married a couple of times, and it hurts to have that person leave you. But at the same time, it would probably be better to have them in your life at one point rather than not have them in your life at all. So there you go. Okay, so I know. While winners are always happy, research has shown that the unhappiest person in a 3-tiered winner's podium is the second-place finisher. The second-place finisher thinks about how he didn't come in first. The third-place finisher is happy because he didn't come in 4th and not win a medal. So if we look at this picture, guess who came in second? Well, there's a silver medal right there. There's gold, there's bronze. These 2 guys are smiling, and he ain't smiling at all. He's not a happy camper. He's thinking if I was only a half a step faster, I'd be in first place and standing on the podium. And the third place guy is, whew,
You're not even holding up the medal.
boy, that fourth place guy was right on my tail. It's a good thing I was a half a step faster. Once again, first, third, And there's second place with not the happiest smile on her face in the world. And once again, first, third, and second place looks like she just lost her puppy.
Third place doesn't look happy either.
What, third place isn't that happy?
Can't.
Yeah, she's trying to control her smile. She's smiling. She's smiling. She's trying to control. She's trying not to look unhappy, and she can't help herself. She came in third. Okay. First and third. There's second place. She's kind of smiling, but she's not all that happy, is she? These two are waving to the crowd. I did it. I did it. Whoops, I went the wrong way. One way to improve our thinking is to understand that we place way too much faith in our judgments. This is known as overconfidence barrier. We would be better off if we use analysis in our decisions rather than trusting ourselves to be brilliant all the time. You can know a lot of different things. You can be a Renaissance person and have lots of different information, but you can't have all the information in the world. It just isn't going to happen. And sometimes you do stupid things. You make stupid mistakes. She's painted herself into a corner. She may be a doctor, she could be a lawyer, she could be anything, but here she is, she painted herself into a corner. Not the smartest thing to do. If she were a painter, she wouldn't have painted herself into a corner, but maybe she's some other type of a brilliant person and she just didn't understand. I do stupid things all the time. I'm not going to tell you any of my stupid stories, but I tell you about how stupid I am all the time. Anyway, that's the way she works. Okay, there you go. I'm all caught up. Now we'll start on chapter 5. The self in a social world. We're so unfortunate. We have to live in a social world. If we could just live by ourselves, why, that would be ideal. Why isn't this working? We'll work downstairs. Ah! Come on. There it goes. All right. There we go. There's a subtle connection between what is happening in the world around us and what's going on in our heads. There is a difference. I read the news all the time, and it drives me crazy what's going on. I'm not real crazy about our president. However, there were a lot of people that weren't crazy about Barack Obama for one reason or another. They didn't like him. They thought he was a socialist. They thought that he was a Muslim spy and that he was going to destroy the United States. I read that several times. Social surroundings tend to affect self-awareness. Depending on who we are and where we are, each individual is aware of the differences between themselves and everyone else. There is a difference between me and the rest of you guys. For one thing, you're natives and I'm not. I'm European. I'm so damn European. I'm just probably worse than you can possibly imagine. I've looked at my DNA and there's nothing but European in there. And it's not just European, it's Western European. So it's English and Irish and French and Belgian and German. No Northern European, no Southern European, it's just right there. And you got to think, well, geez, didn't you like travel? Didn't you go, hey, I like your, black hair. I like your blonde hair. No, none of that. Everybody has brown hair in my family. Not just on my dad's side, it's on my mom's side too. I mean, obviously, I'm half my mom, half my dad. Everybody is. But my son, my son had his DNA checked, and he's got Italian and he's got Scandinavian in his family because, of course, he's half me and he's half my ex-wife, who claimed to be Native American, but she wasn't Native American at all. She was Italian instead. It's almost the same thing. I'm just kidding. It's not the same thing at all. Self-interest colors social judgment. People tend to be objective or dispassionate when they are dealing with a situation they are involved in. Self-concern motivates social behavior. People do things for their own selves and often function to please or impress society at large. So society tells us how to act. Society tells the Hutterites that it's okay. God provides. And however you get that, whether you're stealing the berries off the Blackfeet trees or the bushes in at Fort Belknap, they come onto the reservation, just snatch all the berries. They will. And I don't know what is on their minds. Service berries. No, they're not service berries. What are they?
Sabbath berries.
Yours are Sabbath berries. These are
Choke cherries?
choke cherries. That's what they're. Choke cherries. Thank you. I couldn't think what they were. There's another name for it. It's like choke cherries. Choke cherry soup. Have you ever had that stuff? Oh God, it's so sweet.
With dry meat?
But you have to eat a bowl if you go to one of their ceremonies. Ah, it's so sweet, very rich.
I'm saying it just makes, I can't talk when you're like eating.
It's actually what like how the Navajos have their canalta. Well, it's how a northern native would have their canalta, but they don't call it that. But you know, it's their puberty ceremony. So when they're making it, they the elder ladies, they teach them to go out there, you know, get the berries and stuff, and then they teach them to stir it the right way, you know, not the flathead way, but the right way. I don't know, counterclockwise or whatever. And then, you know, they tell them, you know, what you do, what you don't do, and they just talk to them so they don't go crazy too, you know. So that's how we kind of do our canalta ceremony for the girls. But the puberty ceremony for the boys is the same way. I think every tribe does it the same way for the boys.
Probably not. I'm sure that everybody does it.
Well, everybody sweats.
Everybody, yeah, they have a sweat. Yeah, I've been in on those sweats. Really kind of interesting. It's so damn hot. Hotter than it normally is in a sweat. I don't know what that has to do with anything. Yeah, not the flathead way. They go backwards. Okay. So they're turning themselves into something else. I know. They dance backwards. Everybody knows that. Self-awareness is a state of focused attention on the self. The self-awareness is associated with an activity in your anterior cingulate cortex. And of course, we talked about this before. Self-awareness develops in humans at about 18 months of age. So before 18 months of age, the child doesn't realize that it's separate from its mother or its caregiver or whoever. They will attach themselves to somebody, and they actually think of themselves as an extension of that select individual, whether it's their mother, their father, their auntie, or their grandparents. It really doesn't matter. The child doesn't really realize that they are a separate entity until they're about 18 months of age. And at 18 months, they start saying things like no. They start developing their own concept of self. So, you know, they crawl as soon as they start walking. They realize that they're different. They'll go walking, you know, and you go, don't run into traffic. You know, you grab a hold of their arms and whatever. And guess what happens the next time they're close to traffic? Exactly the same thing, because they're trying to develop autonomy. But of course, autonomy / self-awareness is something that is developed at 18. Most animals do have self-awareness, but not dogs. Dogs are part of their group. They're part of their pack. Wolves are this way. Dogs can potentially be this way. And this is one of the reasons why even a domesticated dog, if he gets into a pack of other wild dogs, while he's at home, he's one entity, but when he gets into that pack, you know, he'll kill sheep, he'll do all kinds of crazy stuff that you wouldn't expect him to do. But of course, the reality is that he has become a pack animal when he's with his pack of wild dogs. And for this reason, of course, if we see this, if we see a pack of dogs that are killing things, you got to kill them all. You can't.
There's an incident that happened several a year, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, a pack of dogs attacking people.
Right. Yeah. They'll attack anything that seems vulnerable, and that's one of the reasons why pit bulls will attack children. If they make a sound that makes them sound vulnerable, their instincts kick in and they just attack it. And how does a pit bull kill things? Well, it bites its head, bites it by the head, takes a hold of it by the head. And of course that's why they do so much damage to the faces of children and whatnot that they attack. Kind of ugly. Anyway, so dogs are pack animals, and that's why I'm afraid to let my dogs out. Yeah, they're just playing. Well, sure, but they could become that vicious pack animal in a nanosecond if they had a pack leader that was evil or bad or whatever. And of course, we would have to euthanize my dogs. That's why I've got to get a taller fence for the damn things. William James was a psychologist, a philosopher, and a physician. In his Principles of Psychology in 1890, he described the development of the self. What he described was emotional identification with an object, makes it part of our self-concept. Of course, he identified with being a psychologist, philosopher, and physician. He came from a brilliant family. His brother was a writer, a very successful writer. So part of his emotional identification was to his family and to his profession. And he also identified the fact that the self changes over time. As we age, things change. We may identify with ourselves as a sexual being that reproduces. As we get older, of course, we stop identifying with that because we're no longer reproducing. So the self does change over time.
Is it different between men and women? Like, as we get older, we identify ourselves and kind of quit identifying?
The female, this concept of being a reproductive individual changes as a woman goes through menopause. So she will stop identifying herself as an individual that can reproduce. Males can reproduce until they die, but of course, there are other factors that play into that. 80-year-old men are probably not going to reproduce. They potentially can't even get an erection, that kind of thing. So it really all depends. It depends on who the guy is and what he's trying to do. We have a president that married two younger women. He married Ivana Trump, okay. Then he married Marla Maples. He left his first wife for his second wife, who was about 10 or 15 years younger than he was. I reproduced with her. Then he married this woman that was like half his age, Melania, right? Okay, and what he's trying to do, he's trying to recapture his youth, or show everybody that he's still a reproductive male. He's 70 now. He's the oldest man that has ever been elected president. But he has recaptured this concept of him being a reproductive male, not once but twice in his lifetime, which is kind of interesting. All the women I've been married to were about the same age. They were within a year and a half of each other. So I wasn't looking for a younger female. I was looking for a new companion, I guess. Okay. But he has done that. It's really kind of fascinating looking at different people. Some individuals will marry somebody that's really young, just trying to recapture their youth. The concept of self. And what does he say about himself? He said he's brilliant. What else did he say besides the fact that he's brilliant? He's very instinctual. He just tends to know things.
I wanna know why he wanted to have a parade in his honor.
I don't know if it was, I don't know, I have no idea. This is really kind of confusing, and the military's kind of pissed off at this point. They really don't, soldiers don't like to march. They do enough walking the way it is. They don't want to march.
And like, he's saying that and everything, and that's something like Kim
Jong-un, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something they do in North Korea. They have these military parades to show how powerful they are. Well,
So he's trying to become a dictator.
I don't know. It's kind of hard to become a dictator in a democracy like this. We'll see what happens. Mead was a philosopher. This is George Herbert Mead. He was a philosopher, sociologist, and psychologist. In the Genesis of Self and Social Control in 1925, Mead wrote that the self emerges through symbolic interaction. It internalizes the view of the generalized other. In other words, society, the view of the generalized other is society, telling us how we're supposed to act. But we emerge from, through all this symbolic interaction. We reproduce, we dress in a certain way. Back in the 1920s, when you were young, you wore short pants. You couldn't wear long pants. You wore pants that came to the bottom of your knees. They were called knickers. And so you wore knickers until you were 18 years old. And then when you were 18 years old, you started wearing long pants. You wore shirts and ties. As kids, you didn't have to do that. So everything was very, very symbolic at this point. And so in order to be an adult, you had to show your adulthood by wearing long pants. And that's really what he's talking about here, this symbolic interaction, these symbolic things that you do. I'm not exactly sure. We're beyond the knickers and long pants era, but there are probably symbolic things that we do. Some people feel that in order to show their adulthood, they need to get drunk. Maybe they need to smoke. Maybe they drive. Only adults are able to drive. These are all symbolic interactions, showing our adulthood. Adults have sex and reproduce, so maybe that's one of the things that males will do. Females, of course, exactly the same thing. They start dressing provocatively. When they're adults, they reproduce. And that shows symbolically that shows that they're an adult. So we have this concept of self, and a lot of it is symbolic. We do what society tells us we need to do in order to show who we are. Show ourselves in comparison with everybody else, as interesting and strange as that may seem. Does all that make sense? You see what I'm talking about? Society tells us how we have to act. And we do all these symbolic things in order to show the world that we are an adult. I don't know, we get an education. I guess education is symbolic as well. People can be socialized in multiple cultural frameworks, moving from one place to another. Of course, if you've lived in Montana and now you live in the Southwest, of course, you're dealing with two completely different cultural frameworks. And because of that, of course, sometimes you feel like your one foot is in one culture and the other foot is in the other culture, and you're split down the middle. It's really kind of tough. A lot of individuals, their parents took them off the reservation when they were growing up. So they lived in Phoenix, and now they live on the reservation. They lived in a white community, and now they live in a native community. And they, of course, as they were growing up, it kind of split them in half. They had to act like a white person in Phoenix, and now that they're on the reservation, they have all this traditional stuff that they have to follow. And it kind of splits them in half, as curious as that is. But you can move from place to place. Of course, unfortunately, well, my kids, I had 2 kids while I was in the military, and we moved 17 times. Well, we moved to Texas, we moved to Oklahoma, we moved to Nebraska, we moved to California, we moved to Germany, we moved to Ohio, We moved from Indiana. So every time we moved, we encountered a new culture. And of course, my kids were very confused as to who they were supposed to be. So confused that my daughter is a Dallas Cowboys fan. How the hell did that ever happen? She's from Indiana. What the hell's she doing? She lives in between. She lives equidistant from Chicago to Cincinnati. We're right there in between. At that time, of course, the Colts were in Baltimore, not in Indianapolis. So how in the world did she ever become a Dallas Cowboys fan? Well, when she started liking football or caring about football, we lived in Lubbock, Texas. And the Cowboys, Troy Aikman, I think, was their quarterback, if I'm not mistaken. And they kept going to the Super Bowl, and she just likes the Cowboys. My son, of course, he's anti my daughter. Who in the world do they play in the Super Bowl? They played the Pittsburgh Steelers, so he's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, just because my daughter is a Dallas Cowboys fan. I know, as bizarre as that seems. Parents from different cultural backgrounds, of course. If one parent is from one culture, another parent is from another culture, the question is, which culture will they follow? Should be followed. When I married my first wife, her family's worked in the factories, and my family, my dad was a banker, my mom was a nurse, so we were different cultures, totally different cultures. The culture of working in the factory is completely different. If you work in the factory, you get paid every Friday. That makes Saturday and Sunday like a holiday. Every Saturday and Sunday is like a holiday. You go out and you buy things, you go out and if you're going to do anything, you're going to do it on Saturday and Sunday. And then, of course, you go back into the factory and work all week. And then on Friday, you get paid again. So now, all of a sudden, Saturday and Sunday are holidays. Well, as far as my dad was concerned, that's not the way they paid every 2 weeks. And, of course, he's a banker, so he has to work late on Friday nights. Friday nights is the time to if you work in the factory, that's when you get drunk. You get drunk on Friday night so that you can go with your family on Saturday and Sunday. So all these factory guys are getting drunk every Friday night. Well, Friday night, my dad had to work late because he had to cash all these checks for all the factory workers, as strange as that may seem. So Friday night was kind of a bad night for us. It was a great night for the factory workers, but it was a bad night for a banker's kids, because we had to stay home. He could never go to our ball games on Friday night because he never knew when he was going to finish up. It was really kind of interesting. So it was totally different cultures. My wife and I came from totally different cultures. And we had trouble. She wanted to, if I got a paycheck, she wanted to spend it. That's the way her family did things. If they got money, they spent it right away. They didn't have to worry about it. They'd buy food. They'd buy food and all this party stuff on Saturday and Sunday, and then they just survived all the way to the next Friday. Then the old man would drink up part of his paycheck. Whatever was left over, they'd buy food and they'd buy clothes and all kinds of interesting things. My family didn't work that way. So we were from totally different cultures, and because of that, we had a lot of conflicts while we were married. She always wanted to spend my paycheck as soon as I got it. Well, unfortunately, in the military, they only paid you once a month. So that means we're going to have a really good time on the last day of the month, but then we're going to be struggling throughout the rest of the month, and that just didn't fit the lifestyle that we were in. Anyway, so we were from two different cultural backgrounds, and it really didn't work. It really was a struggle. My brother married a woman that was from the factories as well. Her family was from the factories, and he was able to adapt to her way of thinking. She forced him to change the way that he thought, and of course, to this day, he's still with her, but he certainly doesn't act like somebody from my family. He acts like somebody from the factories. Living in a subculture with the different values than the dominant culture. So if you live in a subculture, and you guys do, you live in a subculture. You live in the native culture. And the dominant culture, of course, says all of these other things, and you guys know that that isn't always true. People with multiple cultural identities engage in cultural frame switching in response to situational cues. So when you you get a cue, you have to decide, well, do I act like a native, or do I act like a white person? I mean, you have to do that every time you come into class. How in the world did I act in high school? Well, that's totally different from the way that you act in college. This is more except in Wilson and Avery's class, this is more of this is just like, it's the same, it's exactly the same way it would be in a white university, at NAU or ASU or U of A, I got it right this time, or UNM or whatever. It's exactly the same. So you have to decide how you're going to act, whether you're going to act like you did in high school, or whether you're going to act like you think you're supposed to act in a white environment. And this is known as cultural frame switching, as curious as that is. A famous American proverb, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This means that the more you make yourself known, stand out, or unique, or complain, the more attention that you will get. It's trying to tell you that you need to be unique. You need to not be a follower. You need to be a leader. We're Americans. We're leaders. We make noise. We cause trouble. And then we get an advance. Japanese, their proverb is that the nail that stands out gets pounded down. That's what this is talking about, and that's what this picture's all about. This nail is sticking up, so this nail is the one that's going to get pounded with the hammer. And that's the way their society is. When they see somebody that's different, society tells them to stop being different. You need to be the same as everybody else. This means that if you are unique or stand out in any way, the culture will force you to conform, be like everyone else. So the Japanese culture and the American culture are exact opposites of one another, if you think about it. So, and that's one of the reasons why we had such a difficult time fighting the Japanese during World War II. We had no idea what they were thinking. And it's because we don't have the ability to try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. We don't think like that. We try to be unique. We want to be individualistic. But of course the Japanese, they want to conform. That's just the way they are. It's a collectivistic society. So they're different. Eliminate. Gender identity, identification of the self as a male or a female. In North American cultures, women are socialized toward relational self-concepts. Men are socialized toward independent self-concepts. These self-concepts refer to emotional connectedness to others, not the role of self within the group. So women are taught to take care of your families. That's the way you're raised. And we have developed theories as to why women do this. Women don't go out and do the fighting. Men do the fighting. Men go out, they're expendable. Men are expendable. So we can lose all the men that we want. It doesn't make any difference. All you need is one. Women represent babies. Men represent, well, they don't represent anything.
Where I'm from, the men are the women. No,
The men are the women?
but I mean, like, the women take care of the family. The
Right.
women are the dominant, you know. The women go out there and get the food, take care of the family, bring home the paycheck and everything. The men only come home, like, during August through May or April or something. And their role is, you know, just
Protect?
just to kind of show their face and everything, but like, this has been dominant and this has been a culture of the Northern way for a long time, so I think the women have really adapted to this, you know, like, the women up north are so independent and so strong, you know, they just don't even rely on men at all, so it's pretty weird. And even back in the day, the women were the ones that would have to go out sometimes and hunt. bring the wood in and
Sure.
everything, you know.
Right.
We were the strong ones, and you come down here, the women, you know, they have their role and everything. It's a little different, but I was watching the Olympics last night, and I was watching the Korean women. When the men went off to war, the women, what they would do is they would go sea dive, and they would go get all their food and everything.
Right.
And so there's these 80-year-old ladies, and all the way up to 89 years old right now, that have learned this culture where they dive into the ocean and they get abalone and all these different things. And they have their own restaurant, so they're the ones getting the food and they're the ones selling it. And they're trying to teach the young ladies, you know, this is what you do when your husband's gone off to war, you know, this is what you'll have to do. But they don't want to learn anymore, so it's up to these elders to do it, you know. And I guess they like have really good food and stuff, but it's kind of like between Korea and Hawaii where they're doing it. I don't know what kind of native they were, but it was really neat.
Pacific Islanders.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I guess that makes sense. Once again, women have to raise the children, or that's their role, and that's their relational role. More of a relational role. And the men are more independent. So even in your scenario, we're still fulfilling these gender stereotypes that we have, this gender identification, this gender schema, where the women take care of the family, and the men are independent, and so they can wander off. I mean, if we think of Davy Crockett seems to have been gone hunting all the time, or fighting, or doing whatever the hell he was doing, and he wouldn't be home for hardly at all. And it was his wife and his young sons that were taking care of his farm. They were clearing the fields and planting the fields. And of course, he was gone hunting almost all the time. He was just gone. At one point, he was gone for 18 months, and when he came back, his wife had just had a baby.
Oh, I get it.
It took a minute. It turned out that and he raised the child as his own, even though there's no way in hell that it could have been his kid. It was his brother's kid. I know. I don't know what he thought about that, but he raised the kid as his own, and as it turned out, this is the only kid that's, you know, all the rest of Davy Crockett's progeny were killed in the Shawnee Wars or whatever, and then this is the only kid that survived to reproduce. It turned out not to even be his kid at all, but it was her kid, I guess. That's all that's important. Anyway, kind of funny stuff. Or not funny at all. Let's not worry about Davy Crockett and how happy or unhappy he was with his wife. I think identity formation. How are we doing? Oh, we're almost. Why don't we stop right here and we'll pick this up next time. I don't want to run over. I don't think I can get through this slide. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about the Davy Crockett story. Yeah, Davy Crockett was.
Texas War.
Yeah, he died at the Alamo. But he was also a congressman from Kentucky, Tennessee, I guess. He was a congressman from Tennessee. He settled that whole area. He fought the Shawnee were his big enemies. He fought in the Red Stick Wars. You don't know who the Red Sticks are? They're the Creeks. Have you ever heard of the Creeks? They're one of the 5 civilized tribes. Anyway, not important. Sorry, Davy Crockett was an old frontiersman. He was born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. Greatest land in the world of the free.
That's a good old line.
He killed him a bar when he was only 3.
I thought you were going to sing the song.
I can't remember the rest of it. Anyway, he killed a bear when he was only 3. He was a braggart, and they wrote books about it because, well, they wrote books about it.